Haunted house workers of Reddit, what's the worst thing you've seen happen while on the job? I worked one in high school my junior year. I wore a black skin suit so that I was basically invisible in the low light of the house. I was told that I wasn't to physically touch any of the visitors to the haunted house. The organizer placed me at the end of the house in a hallway with open rafters above me. I hung onto the rafters and waited for someone to show up. About an hour into my shift a group of teenagers showed up, and as I had many times before I dropped from rafters and howled at them. The fun part about this group of teenagers is that they were packing knives. Every last fucking one of them. They all pulled them and one shouted at me, "Who's scared now?" To which I promptly said that would be me. I backed against the wall and the group walked past me, thank God. A few minutes later the on-duty police officer came by and asked how I was, and I told him what happened. When my shift ended 30 minutes later I found the officer helping the kids that pulled the knives on me into his and another police car. TL, doctor, teenagers pulled knives on me. Officer helped their delinquent asses into police cars. I worked at a haunted trail in high school. The worst thing that happened was actually to a fellow worker and not a guest. His chainsaw had run out of gas and instead of using a flashlight to see where he was pouring the gas, he decided to use a lighter. I was in the next stop on the trail and when I heard blood-curdling screams I ran over to see him rolling on the ground with his arm on fire trying to put it out. When I was training for my EMT I had to do a shift in the emergency room, just watching, maybe helping do some simple stuff. I picked the night before Halloween. It turned out to be a sad night. I was 18 years old and they brought in a 16 or 17-year-old kid that they had stabilized in the ambulance. He was working at one of the local scare place posing as someone who was being hanged. He fell with a rope around his neck and actually hung himself. I remember seeing the x-rays and you could see where there was a gap between vertebrae. The doctor just pointed to it and said he could not tell how bad it was but he might have become a paraplegic that night. I hope to God he got better. We used to have a haunted house every year in the fall in my city, but too many lawsuits forced it to shut down. My dad, who works for the city and saw a lot of the cases, told me about one in particular where this one guy went into the haunted house, but was terrified of clowns. There was this one room where these clowns come out at you with chainsaws. Original, right? And the guy got so scared he grabbed one of the clowns and beat the shit out of him, then proceeded to run away through the tarp walls of the haunted house, causing it to collapse. The poor clown then sued the haunted house for physical and emotional damage and had to be put on Prozac. Everyone who dealt with the case called him Prozac the Clown. I gave a girl a seizure one time. That night, I was standing in a hallway dressed like an insane asylum inmate with gouged out eyes, and I had a little buzzer in my hand I could press to make the hall's strobe lights buzz and a long sound go off. I pressed the buzzer as a woman entered with her boyfriend, and at first I thought she was shaking with fear. Nope, seizure. I broke character and escorted them out the secret door and flagged down a manager. I'm sure seeing a creepy chick with gouged out eyes trying to lead you somewhere was alarming for the couple. I'm not sure what happened after the ambulance came but I heard she was on drugs, and the company I was working for didn't get sued, so I assume/hope she's fine. The worst thing I've seen at my haunt didn't actually have anything to do with us being a haunted house. We had rain, wind, and hail one night and didn't get the message out fast enough to get everyone to safety. A metal sign came loose and hit a woman, a customer, not a worker, over the head at what we believed to be 40 miles per hour. She had a concussion and spent the night in the hospital, but she was fine in the end and didn't take legal action. Other than that I've seen people cry, have panic attacks. I saw a guy get scared and bite his presumed girlfriend's shoulder. One of our actor was kicked in the head by another actor who was swinging from a rope. Workers who've cut themselves while preparing sets, customers who've gone out of their way to get into actor-only areas who've gotten hurt. I've been kicked. Actors are pretty frequently punched, and frequently, almost once a night, people corner smaller or younger actors and comment that they're sexy, ask for dates/sex, try to touch, and breath their beer breath on you. Somehow the job is still fun and I keep going back. I'm not a haunted house worker, but I remember one comment from a while ago, the tale of the dildo bandit. Anyways, I hope I can post it here. I'll copy and paste it here. I never worked at one, but went to one and saw something hilarious happen several years ago. Every year there was this one haunted theme park that is really strict about what you can bring in with you before you enter. The security guards were known to sometimes be jerks to people. There would be several lines, and in each line, there is a security guard that would make you empty your pockets, and then pat you down. One prankster in a hoodie came prepared to have some fun with a poor security guard that night. I take out my wallet, phone, etc. and place them in a tray, and as I am getting patted down, I glance over to my left and see a security guard order a guy to remove everything from his clearly overstuffed pockets. He pulls out a giant dildo and tries to hand it to the security guard. The guard puts his hands up in the air for a moment, signaling he doesn't want to touch it, and tells the guy to put it in the tray, and to continue emptying his pockets, with a puzzled look on his face. I get my stuff from the tray, get waved through, and wait there for my group of friends to come through. The prankster reaches into the same pocket and pulls out an even bigger dildo, and puts in the tray. People start laughing, and the security guard asks, "What did you bring these for?" And the guy just shrugs, keeping a straight face, and says forgot to leave them in the car. He keeps emptying out his pockets, and in his other pocket, he has 2 more gigantic dildos. By this time everyone, including the other security guards, have paused and are laughing at the spectacle. The poor security guard sighs and says alright, hands above your head, and begins to pat the guy down. Then he shouts out, "Oh, for fuck's sake." Once he reaches the guy's waistband. The guy lifts up his shirt and has several more dildos stuffed in his waistband. Everyone bursts out laughing again. He takes them out and places them in the tray. The security guard continues to pat the guy down, and when he gets down to his ankles he lets out a loud sigh and goes, "Just take them out." Sure enough, the guy had 1 dildo stuffed in each sock. He takes them out and places them in the tray. Red-faced with embarrassment, the security guard says, "I can't let you take those in." The guy says, "That's fine, can I just pick them up when I leave?" The security guard says no. The prankster, trying not to break character, says, "Well, okay, you can toss them." The guard waves him through. People start applauding. As the guy is running off, he turns around and pulls a dildo out of the hood of his sweatshirt and starts waving it around, and shouts to war. With the dildo held high above him, and starts running for the entrance to a maze. Everyone bursts out laughing again, cheering him on, and some guards go chasing after him and apprehend him. I don't know if he got booted from the park, but as I was walking by with my friends, they sat him down on a curb and were holding him there. People that were going in were applauding him and cheering for him, and everyone was cracking up. My friends and I were in tears. That spectacle alone made my night. My friends and I call him the Dildo Bandit, and we always have a good laugh when one of us brings it up. Some guy grabbed a girl's boob as he laughed at her and then proceeded to punch a guy dressed as a clown. 14-year-olds trying to beat up our prowlers, people who chase you to your car, in the parking lot. Some dude gave a zombie a wet willy once. He didn't get into the house yet and was thrown out with no refund. He'd already had the rules explained to him by that point. There was one time I smashed a metal fireplace shovel in half. I'd been doing it all night. When I hit it on the ground for one tour, the thing finally snapped and they all damn near shat themselves because it made me look like a small girl with beastly strength. There was another time when I was telling this group of girls to exit my room. They were in a corner, on the floor, crying their eyes out and screaming. Every time I told them to leave, they'd flip out more. It was to the point that multiple tours were about to run into each other because they wouldn't leave. Thankfully, they eventually calmed down enough to get the hint that they had to go and finally exited the room, but goddamn. Girls get hit on by preteens and older men all the time. I was a creepy doll once, but the creepiest thing was having an older man tell me how much he wanted to play with me. I worked in one of those amusement park Halloween fest haunted houses as a teenager. Worst thing that happened to someone else. A bunch of redneck parents dragged their son who was maybe 7 years old into the haunted house, despite him being terrified. I jumped out all zombified, not realizing the next group included a small child. We were alerted by motion sensors, and found myself face to face with a terrified little boy, frozen in place, tears running down his cheeks and piss running down his pant legs. His parents just laughed. I doubt they took him home to change pants. Worst thing that happened to me. Do you know how many people try to punch, grope, feel up, hump and molest theme park zombies? I was 14, you fucking shickos. Once a year there is a fair in town with all sorts of attractions and roller coasters and of course a haunted house. It's one of those rides where you get into this cart type thingy on a track and along the way stuff pops out at you, probably know what I'm talking about. After like 9 PM they would put real people into the attraction. I applied for a job for the holiday there so I got to scare people and get paid, seemed like a pretty good deal to me, right? When the carts went up to the second floor they turned around, I had to jump at them and make some weird noises. The other guys had like a chainsaw or something else but I couldn't do that. One time this couple came up with their cart and the dude had his hand hanging out of the cart. I jumped out at them and accidentally bumped against his hand. No biggie, happens all the time, although this time it was a little bit rough. The dude was screaming something but it's a freaking haunted house. Everyone screams. The ride just kept going like normal. After like 5 minutes the emergency lights went on and the track stopped. They called us down and shut down the ride for the day. When I was working my way down to the entrance I noticed I had some blood on my suit, which was odd because that's not part of the costume. I was wearing one of those crazy clown suits which was freaking hot on the inside. At the entrance I saw some paramedics and in the back of my mind I kinda knew what was going on but like not really until I saw the guy sitting in the back of the ambulance with his hand covered in bandages. Apparently the guy had old stitches that had come loose when I jumped against him. I got fired, which I still think is bullshit but yay. They didn't give me my paycheck either, said it was to clean the suit. It was cleaned up by the time I got to work, but someone had jumped the fence to the property one night and shot himself in the head with a revolver from the 20s. As far as ghosts go, I had a door continually slam in my face every time I opened it, 3 to 4 times, and when I finally said stop it, the door remained opened. Edit, this is an actual haunted house. Not one of the Halloween ones. I have 2 stories from a haunted house where I used to work. This one happened as a 13-14-year-old, long before I worked there. This haunted house had a 3-story slide towards the end. However, they also had a smaller trick slide where they redirected 4 of us in my group. This trick slide led to a room that looked like a prison cell where an actor playing Freddy proceeded to scare the shit out of one of my friends. I have never seen someone so terrified. She was screaming and cowering, and Freddy did not stop. They must have held us there for 10 to 15 minutes, while we watched others in our group pass by through the small, barred window. And this one happened while I worked there, this haunted house that had a pole out front. The actor that played a clown would frequently use it to pole dance now. This was the best haunted house to work at, because after it closed on Halloween night, all the actors age 21 and up get to stay and drink in the house. Several of the actors decided to try out the pole, and one of them, after too much to drink, fell off the platform. In one haunted house I know of, the owner wasn't getting enough visits. So he hired a young business consultant who had recently graduated from a top business school in Canada. The advice? Convince people who were visiting that they had contracted a serious respiratory disease. This meant, in part, having a fake biohazard team in bubble suits come in and escort them away. It was very convincing and somewhat horrifying. The idea was to upset someone so badly that they would then sue the haunted house. It would become a news story, haunted house sued for being too scary, assuring the business a lot of visits. I'm not sure how it ended, though, of if the plan worked. When my sister and I were about 5 and 7, respectively. My mom was building a haunted house maze in an old Walmart. We were not allowed to go inside the maze part, but one night we got into a little dispute over whose turn it was to pick the next song, so we went looking for Mom. We got through the first couple of rooms before we broke down in tears and refused to go any further. 20 minutes later of screaming and crying, my mom finally found us. It was horrifying. Still gives me chills 20 years later. Well, I didn't actually work there, but I went to one with my friend, who worked there and wanted me to meet his scare partners, so of course I went because I love scary things. He had to stay in the car to finish fixing his mask and shit, and told me to go in. I put in my headphones to listen to some music while I wait, and I opened the doors. I sat on a bench that had baby dolls on it, which I didn't mind, and sat there while I was just browsing some Reddit. Well, some guy, let's call him Dickwad, popped out of nowhere while wearing an alien costume and tapped my shoulder. I looked up and screamed, dropped my phone, and kicked Dickwad in his guts and ran outside to my friend and hid behind him. Dickwad came back out holding his stomach and was laughing a little. Now he became my Dickwad boyfriend. I went to the Fuji-Q Haunted Hospital at Fuji Island in Japan since I live right there, and I actually made the actors break character because my reactions were so over the top. I'd been teasing my boyfriend to go with me for years, but he said he had zero interest in going. Finally I convinced a few of my friends to come in with me, and we were all laughing about how fake the whole thing was, how it was so stupid that people would get scared over something like that, etc., etc. It was hilarious. By the end of the tour, it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to walk through the whole thing maybe. We were all in tears and gasping for breath, all because I realized while taking that tour how incredibly jittery/nervous I am. Near the beginning there's like an air valve that pops and a strobe light flashes very suddenly when you're walking up a flight of stairs, and I lost it. I'm a dude with a huge beard who was just talking about how not scary the place was, and I screeched this blood-curdling scream in a high-pitched voice and threw myself onto the floor. My friends weren't even fazed, but were laughing at how ridiculous my reaction was. Moments later a zombie appeared to shock us, and I did the same thing again. Flew into a wall and just let out this wretched scream like a 17-year-old girl getting killed in a slashes movie from the 70s. None of it on purpose. My friends were laughing at me so hard, and my screams continued throughout, that even other guests could be heard laughing at me from the distance. The actors themselves would also start trying to hide their laughter when they popped out to scare me, and I just lost my tits. So fun. I know now though that if someone ever attacked me in an alleyway I'd scream like a girl. I volunteered at a friend's haunted house at our community clubhouse last Halloween. Since it was the last year they were doing it, they set it up special. There was a room where the friend's dad was dressed as a clown, that the kids would enter in the dark, and me and one of the friends would switch the lights on. The kids then had to exit through a tunnel. One of them pissed themselves. We had to close it down to mop it up. I worked for one 4 or 5 years in a row. Every year there was something decent. I think my two favorites are, every year, each portion of the attraction, we had a haunted house, forest, and hayride, got to shut down 30 to 45 minutes early and go into the other attractions to see what they were doing that year. I was at the front of the group going into the haunted house, which meant I was right behind a group of paying customers. There was this huge guy in the group in front of us, probably 6 feet 6 inches, 300 pounds. He was kind of a dick to everyone. About anything. He enters a room just ahead of me. I wait a second, and this gigantic man comes flying backwards out of the room, screaming bloody murder. I've only ever heard a scream like that in a video where someone was being shot to death or mauled by a bear. Thanks for that, BTW, Reddit. He begins screaming, fuck that. I am not going in there. You know I hate clowns. To his friends, who are laughing. I start to laugh, too, when the man in the clown suit in the next room sticks his head out and looks right at the large man now on the floor. The screams begin coming again from the giant man and tears start pouring down his cheeks. He jumps to his feet and runs screaming, back the way he came. And I never saw him again. It was amazing. At the end of the forest, there were guys in hockey masks with chainsaws who chased you out of the forest. When they burst out, a father grabs his 6 or 7-year-old son and holds onto him and yells, "Get this one. It's his birthday," and begins pushing his young son towards the chainsaw guys. We sold these glow sticks that were about as big around as a baseball bat handle and probably half a foot long. And this kid had one. He spun around, clocked his dad square in the temple with it, and dad goes down hard. Lights out. The chainsaw guys come running toward the dad and the kid, partly because it's their job and partly to check on the dad, so the kid screams, "You can't catch me. Get him," and throws the glow stick at the chainsaw guys and runs like a madman out of the forest. Dad's still unconscious on the floor. Paramedics came in, checked him out. He was okay, but they took him in to check for a concussion. It wasn't funny when it happened, but looking back on it I laugh my ass off when I run into one of the other guys who were there and ask them if they remember that. Edit, I thought of one more. One year, long story short, I was working in a gypsy camp in the forest, and I dressed in drag full makeup, long hair, stuffed bra. I was actually a little too passable as a woman. When my mother saw me, she said she wished I'd been born a girl, so I kept a 5 o'clock shadow to make it clear I was a guy. I would hide my lower face behind my hair, and the 2 women I was working with would proposition men coming through to see if they wanted to buy their sister, me. When they would get close or show interest, I would let the hair away from my face. This was my idea, as I thought the gypsy camp was boring as is and spiced it up a bit. It went well. We had a drunk group of frat boys come through one night, and one of them was a bit intoxicated and very interested in the prospect of purchasing their sister. He very aggressively grabbed me and began rubbing up on me. He grabbed my ass, hand moving towards my fake breasts, when he brushed up against a surprise. He jumped back and screamed, "Fuck that. That's a fucking man." I felt his dick. That's a man. I let my hair down right then. His friends immediately began making fun of him. "You grabbed that guy's dick?" I said. "That's not all he grabbed." The guy was clearly a bit homophobic and a bit upset, and his friends were really giving him hell. Security saw it happen and offered to throw him out. I said, "Nah. I think he learned his lesson, but if he gives anyone else any shit, toss him." I really wish I had a video of that happening. I was working at a haunted house in high school one year for my mandatory 40 hours of community service required to graduate. I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. I was wearing a kind of Grim Reaper robe with a deep hood, and so were the 2 other volunteers in that area of the walkthrough, one of whom was my sister. We were supposed to stand well back into the shadows, and then, as the guests walked through the path in the middle, we would kinda swoop out and alarm them, and then fade back into the background. A man came through and we did the swoop in, and he didn't seem alarmed, which is fine, not everyone is, but he was giggling. Like, late 30s, early 40s-year-old man. He turned to me, as I stood there waiting for him to pass, you know, give them the old creepy "I am intrigued by you" stare before fading back, and then he raised both his hands toward me and closed the distance between us. He grabbed my breasts. I froze and I didn't even know how to react. I was way too young and he was way too old for me to have expected that. I just kind of shrank back until he kept on walking, but he started heading towards my sister and I got really mad. Luckily he didn't touch them, he just kind of laughed to them strangely, and then kept going through the haunt. What was the scariest thing was that he had a little boy with him, maybe 6 years old. We had been told in no uncertain terms that we were not allowed to leave our stations, and since I'd never had a job in my life before, I didn't know about my rights, etc., and so I stayed there until our shift changeover, where the haunt is closed for 5 minutes while all the volunteer kids switch to different stations. Why that was necessary I don't know. I told the manager woman about it then, and she yelled at me for not coming and finding her sooner and reporting the guest. After that night my sister and I never went back. She was short-staffed, and the kids who did stick through it ended up absolutely trashing the haunt, and she never took volunteers from my high school again. This pleases me. So this isn't quite the same, but I play piano. Not like, professionally, but enough that can you play spooky music? Is something I can do with minor chords, etc. And a friend of mine asked me to be part of his church's haunted house. At the time, I was Christian, so I thought it would be cool like a haunted house but in a church so people would feel safe. Yes, I was naive. Also it was a relatively new idea then. Other churches/synagogues/whatever would do something around Halloween too. So I get to the place, and I'm playing the minor chords and basically being the Phantom of the Opera while they have a kid die from snorting cocaine, and actually, I'm fine with that at the time. It was the era of DRE being a thing that wasn't totally debunked. Then they changed things up and the kid is dying of AIDS and going to hell for improper sexual conduct, and I am fucking pissed. There's very little reason not to tell people not to take cocaine, but fuck this shit. I have gay friends and family and this will not fly. I drop the cover into the keys, stand up and leave. I wish I said something awesome, but I was just so mad at the time. This brings back memories. Couple short stories I can share. First. Teenaged black female apparently had an immense fear of clowns. She wasn't aware we had clowns in our house. They sort of resembled the clowns from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Their job is to basically jump out from blind spot and startle people. She was so scared she shit and pissed herself, then passed out and busted her head open. Second. Couple of bro types getting lost in the house, and essentially break down crying. I got to escort them to one of the mercy exits for people that can't make it all the way through. Third. Teenaged white female this time. Became so frightened her flight response kicked in. She tripped up, getting her pants caught on some decorations. She flailed free, disrobing herself from the waist down, and ran out the house. I guess don't go commando to haunted houses is the lesson here. And when I say she ran, I am being a bit generous with the definition, as she was pushing 300 pounds easily. Those are the only notable ones.